Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. It's always a treat to welcome an author who is able to impact our community. Today is one of those days, and we welcome Earl Johnson, who is the author of Finding Comfort During Hard Times. Good morning, Earl.
Good morning, Susie.
Interesting title, and let's let everyone know out of the gate, you know of what you speak. You actually are a survivor of the September 11th attacks, yes?
Well, I was in Arlington, Virginia when the plane hit the Pentagon, and I heard it. And so I had just moved down from New York City, where I lived in Lower Manhattan, and I moved from Lower Manhattan to Arlington, Virginia on September 9th, 2001. So some would say it'd be out of the frying pan into the fire.
Exactly.
Because lest we forget, it impacted, three different locations. But that started my career from being a hospital and hospice chaplain to becoming a disaster chaplain.
Mm-hmm. It must have been absolutely terrifying to see that happening. And that day, anyone alive during that time will remember exactly where they were, not knowing when the next shoe was going to drop. It seemed like there was one attack after another on that day. Your thoughts?
Well, that's absolutely right. And, I'm a spiritual care professional, and I had years and years of experiences both in emergency room and in rooms in trauma settings. But as a spiritual care professional, the root of the word spirit is respire. That's the Latin, which means to breathe. And you just held your breath because it was such a momentous occasion that, I just caught my breath, to witness that and the after effects of it. You just, were paralyzed, and it was really, really unprecedented.
Truly, and thankfully, we haven't seen anything like it since.
That is correct.
And
it doesn't seem like it's... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
It doesn't seem like it's been 19 years. There's been a whole generation of young people that have been born and raised, and now many of them serving in the armed services after September 11th.
Right.
So it just is extraordinary.
The mindset, every year, I used to work at a college, and every year they would send out some kind of mindset about the incoming freshman class. And when their mindset is that they've always been on this earth since after that happened, that is mind-blowing, I think, to everybody else, to all the rest of us.
It really is.
What?
It really is. Just like, my parents' generation, they had Pearl Harbor,
yes.
and I had the Kennedy assassination that I remember where I was. But as I say, it is one of those watershed events.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think when we talk about September 11th, the focus seems to be on the Twin Towers, and there is not as much spoken about the attack on the Pentagon? There is somewhat on the field in Pennsylvania, but
right.
Not. Why do we not talk about the Pentagon attack?
Well, I think it's because of the nature of the catastrophe and the number of mass fatalities. Thousands and thousands died in New York City, and that's also the media epicenter. And, this was completely televised, for better or worse. I mean, school children were sitting at their desk watching this on TV, and we didn't know any better. Because this was also very traumatic to watch.
Yes.
And we know, you know, the reason why I wrote the book was about comforting people in these sort of critical, catastrophic times, and going from being at a hospital in Lower Manhattan and in Washington, D.C., where we had the burn unit, where they brought the people in from the Pentagon, to working with the Red Cross in disaster and in spiritual care and chaplaincy. What a journey, but we learned, because of the impact on New York City and Arlington and Shanksville, that it's not just the physical damage of these events, it's also the emotional and spiritual damage that this caused.
Yes.
So that's, you know, no person who's been exposed to this kind of trauma is not unchanged by it.
Right. What kind of shift took place then in your ministry as you moved from being one kind of chaplain to really addressing crisis?
Well, I have to, for complete disclosure, I have to say that I had a sister who was actively dying of a rare form of cancer. And so it became difficult for me to go into hospital rooms to see middle-aged women with cancer. And so I knew that I couldn't be present. I couldn't fully serve, you know, their needs, because I'd always be thinking in the back of the mind about my sister. And so long about that time is when September 11th happened. And so I was doing both hospital and hospice, and then also working with the Red Cross, and there came to be this shift, this point of decision of saying, look, you know, God has given you this new opportunity. It really is saving you in a way, because you have these new difficulties being present with you know, your sister actively dying. And here you have something to offer people who have experienced catastrophic mass fatality disasters. And all that training that I had in hospital and hospice transfers over to the disaster arena. And, you know, it's sort of the focus and the intent, and not even the agenda, but it is transferable. And so in my work in disaster, whenever I had to recruit chaplains to go out on a tornado or a hurricane or a school shooting, I'd always look for hospital and hospice chaplains, because I knew they knew how to be present.
Yes.
And I knew they had the training, and I knew they had the capacity, and I knew they had the ministry.
We are fighting a different kind of enemy right now with this coronavirus. Many people will look back on this as a disaster. It's been, for many, fortunately, more of an inconvenience, but for many families impacted, it's been devastating. What words of comfort do you have for us today?
Well, you're absolutely right. And who knew? Who knew that, you know, 2020 didn't start out this way?
No.
But in my experience, working with AIDS patients and with the SARS pandemic and Ebola, you know, there are some similarities, you know, the unknown, the infectious agent. And first of all, you have to affirm and acknowledge that this is a really, really hard time, that this is not a normal time. And so because it is an extreme, you really, in terms of comforting people, have to acknowledge that this is not a normal time. And then also, you have to affirm that we have the necessity to grieve, because what is it? We have 128,000 people die in the last 3.5 months, and that's has a profound impact upon us individually and collectively as a nation. So we have to affirm the necessity to grieve, because the world is different, and we have to mourn that change. And then, it's important as we comfort people, we need to affirm the need to be patient and the need to be resilient. And that's easier said than done. But when you're working to comfort folks, you have to help them identify in their own lives sources of hope, sources of meaning. It could be their family, it could be their faith, but just work with people to help them identify sources of hope.
Yes. You talk about the necessity to grieve. COVID-19 is not the only thing impacting people. I've had, friends lose their husbands with some kind of a stroke out of the blue or a heart attack or something. Other things are happening. But because of COVID, they've not been allowed to do the normal kind of grieving because they couldn't have a normal kind of funeral. You couldn't just take food over to them, do all those things that we do to help someone during their grief process.
That's right. Not
allowed. Can't bake a casserole and take it. So what do you suggest we do as far as someone going through a grieving process not related to the virus, but just going through grieving process, how important it is to be able to minister to one another during that time at a time when we're not allowed?
Well, I'm very glad that you pointed that out because COVID-19 hasn't been happening in a vacuum,
yes.
and life has gone on, and so has illness and disease and death, and I think we're called to be creative with developing rituals that mean something, but may not be conventional, like gathering together for a funeral. And I see these very creative new rituals of using electronic media like iPads and computers and things, and it's not the same thing. But people can be very, very creative if they understand, what the problem is, what the challenges is. But we need to be creative about what it means to be a good neighbor. Mm-hmm. Does it mean going old school and picking up a telephone, as well as email? People have been leaving food on doorsteps, in lieu of actually being able to hand it. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. As people of faith, it's all about community and that support we try to offer and comfort. But, we're going to have to talk in terms of, like, for high school seniors, that it's the graduation season or the wedding season or even the grieving and mourning season, that we may not be able to gather together in July, but come September, if everything is the rate of infection has stalled or stopped, then we can go back to the more traditional way of grieving and mourning. But it's daunting, and that's why I say it's a really, really hard time, because of the impact it has upon us individually. Mm-hmm. It's not just supporting others. It's we have been traumatized, and we have been seeking wisdom and guidance to, not only how can I live through this, but how can I support my family and my greater community that may be experiencing other everyday disasters.
We're visiting with Earl Johnson, author of Finding Comfort During Hard Times. We'll be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community. Welcome back to Our Community. Susie Thomas with you, visiting with Earl Johnson. He is the author of Finding Comfort During Hard Times. Earl, just before the break, you said something I want to pick up on, that we're not only trying to comfort those around us, but we're going through this all at the same time. How do you, as a comforter, find comfort?
Well, thank you for asking that, Susie. We have to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first, and that's not being selfish. That's just, it's more than common sense. It's more than, to take care of other people, we have to take care of ourselves. And so, I'm very privileged. I'm very blessed. I have a loving family. I have a faith. I have a community of support. Not everybody has that. And so I have, the hard-gained wisdom and experience that comforts me, and also it gives me the ability to say no, to say, it's too much. I need to take a break. And just being true to yourself, whether it's a 10-minute break or an hour break, or even a day, you have to do things for yourself to fill your cup, and it also lifts your spirits and gives you the capacity once again to be present for other people. And it may be mixing up things. It may be sometimes my coping strategies is I may have ice cream for breakfast, or
great idea.
Go out and have a cinnamon roll. Mm-hmm. But it's just that break from the normal time, and that I'm doing something for me. And that's not being selfish, because we are modeling abundance. We're not modeling scarcity. And it's the modeling the abundance of the Spirit, where it puts us in good stead that physically I need to recover, emotionally I need to recover, but some things are going to stick with us a really, really long time, and we have to be patient, and that's easier said than done, particularly if we have young children.
Oh, yes. Well, you're right. Modeling abundance. We can't give what we don't have. So a little self-care is called for. What do you say to young children during this time? It makes me so sad to see little kids wearing face masks, although sometimes they are more resilient than we adults are.
That's just it. They are. And, I was working with a group of disaster response professionals, and we were saying, children have spiritual lives too. Yes. And not that that's, the light bulbs went off in the room, but it's saying, of course, and they sometimes portray a maturity that is beyond their years. But we need to be truthful, and we need to be age-appropriately truthful, because they're picking up all the vibes from their parents or from adults, and they know something's going on. They're being exposed many times to the same media that we're being exposed to, but tell the truth. Say, this is a hard time. This isn't a normal time, but you're safe with me. We're going to go through this together. You don't have to be afraid. And I think those positive messages that, the kids don't need enough, they don't need an hour lecture on coping strategies. It's just that they just enough to say, I hear you, you are here with me, and you are safe.
Mm-hmm. So many young parents suddenly becoming homeschoolers without knowing that was going to happen at the beginning of the school year. They are getting to do the world's best object lesson on this. Nothing that schools could have come up with would be better to be able to talk about faith, talk about God is real, He is protecting us, than to walk through this together as a family. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree, and many times people have so many obligations and responsibilities that the last thing, this rampant unemployment or underemployment, and then at the same time you have to homeschool your kids.
Right.
And it's sort of, if they were handing out prizes for parenting, many people would be at the head of the line for what they've had to endure. And I'm saying that in a very loving, positive way, but this unanticipated time of being together and looking on the bright side of saying, hey, this is an extraordinary gift that you're giving your kids, even though it's the hardest job in the world, being a teacher. Some would say. And so that this time spent together, I have heard all these messages from parents and also from children, too, of saying, I'm getting time to spend with mom and dad, or, they're not letting me, they're making me do my homework, or I don't have as much free time as I had when I was in school and had recess and everything. But it's look on the bright side, and that this gift of the parents spending time with the children, being the teachers, sending the right parental guidance that the parents would hope the kids had picked up in school, and that this is the strongest example, the strongest modeling is what the child sees the parent doing and being.
Absolutely. I have a 3-year-old grandson, Earl, who has always hated that Daddy has to go to work. This has been a dream come true for him. Daddy gets to work at home right now. This is what he asked for, and now he's got it. It is. I think people will look back on this as a very precious time, that where our pace slowed down a little bit. All these extracurriculars suddenly got, everybody's weekend was suddenly empty, and all the things you had to go to weren't happening. And in some ways, that was a bit of a gift, wasn't it?
Yes, and I would put the emphasis on the positive, and I know in the midst of it, I have an almost 4-year-old great niece, and she's loving it too because Daddy and Mommy are both home, and they might pick up on the economic pressure of Mom and Dad not working, or Mom and Dad relying upon a larger family for support or caretaking. But again, isn't this the way it used to be? Before we had such mobility and so many distractions. And I'm not saying that the good old days were perfect, but this idea of living together, working together, playing together, may not have been such a bad thing after all.
No.
And it is a comfort. The children are being comforted by the presence of their family, and this emerging need coming out of a disaster, and whether it's a child or an adult, what the primary needs are information and reassurance. And so the parent is giving the child information through this homeschooling, and also morality, and emphasizing the important points of the lesson, and also representing their faith and all the faith dynamics in the family, and then also reassuring the child, because it is a scary time, and some children are beyond their ages, but it is a traumatic time, and it's traumatic for us, and it's traumatic for them, and this need to comfort and being an instrument of hope and being an instrument of healing is very spiritual, and it's God-given. And, it is, this kind of work is also, I believe, a form of prayer.
Yes. And worship, I would say. Your book could not have come at a better time. Finding Comfort During Hard Times. Certainly, you didn't, in the end of February, pick up a pen and start to write this. So tell us how, it was just something that was on your heart, and then it just ended up being so timely to come out now. How did that all happen?
Well, it did. I started about 10 years ago on the 10th anniversary of September 11th, and I had been traumatized by my work in disaster, and so I took time off and had the privilege or this luxury of reflection. And what emerged coming out of this period of reflection was comfort and this profound need to comfort. So I thought back in my own experience working with AIDS patients when there was no hope, when everybody died, and what did people do then? How did we survive? And then I went ahead and saw that I had worked with SARS, the SARS epidemic, and then eventually Ebola. Very frightening, horrific diseases with sort of not instant cures. And again, the voice in my head is saying, these people need to be comforted. That they need medicine, they need infection control, but they also have this profound emotional and spiritual needs for people to companion them, to listen to them, and just, in some instances be honest with them that they are going through an extreme experience and that after this there will be a new normal, and maybe that's recovery or maybe that's reconciliation. That was sort of the genesis of the idea of the book, and I have to tell you, well, it's a horrific story, but you gotta see sometimes this dark humor in it. But the day my book was published, the next day, because of COVID, the publisher laid off the entire 450-person staff because of COVID-19 and not even working from home. So it's been difficult to promote the book, but through good agents like yourself, I've been able to share the message. But, if something can be too timely, maybe my book is.
A little too timely. I'm guessing we can get it from Amazon and every place that we buy books, yes?
That is correct. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and your local independent bookstore, which eventually will reopen.
Yeah, it will.
I have faith that exactly.
It will. In the meantime, go online. Find this, Finding Comfort During Hard Times by Earl Johnson. Earl, thank you so much for bringing this to our community today.
Well, it has been my pleasure, and as I said, just forge onward. This too will pass, and it's kind of hard to see the light, through just the despair of this disease and the heartbreaking stories that we're encountering. But let us be there for other people. Let us be the good neighbor, and let us be, an instrument of hope and healing.
Amen. Thank you again.